Hey, Tim. All right, hello everybody. Thanks for your patience. So we're 5 minutes past the hour. So I think we could get started, although we still don't have a ton of people in the room. Nonetheless, I think we can get through the chair stuff. So yeah, so this is another Mimi virtual interim. I forget which number it is. As usual, please make yourself aware of the IETF note well if you haven't before, in particular the policies on intellectual property and the code of conduct. So today's agenda, as usual, it's the Rowan May show. So first off, we're going to look at the new Mimi app components draft. Rowan, I got your slides for this, and I just uploaded them right into MeetEcho. We'll see if that works. I've never done this before. And then also Rowan is going to, I believe, guide us through, catch us up on a discussion that's been going on in the mailing list about the representation of roles and capabilities in Mimi policy, I believe. And well, we'll see what Rowan has to say about all that. Anything else for the agenda today? Rowan?
I was just gonna say that we could just go over the email thread for the role capability discussion. I didn't prepare slides for that, but I think it's pretty well expressed on the mailing list.
Okay. All right. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to discuss in today's meeting? Okay. In that case, let's test out the slide upload feature. Oh my goodness, it works. Okay. Rowan, take it away.
Okay. Hey, everybody. We've got this draft May Mimi app components, which I did as a separate draft, so it would be short and easy to read compared to the already voluminous draft IETF Mimi room policy. But as I said in previous meetings, previous interims, and on the mailing list, the goal is for these contents to get merged in there and all the contradictory stuff that's in there to get, changed or deleted or moved or whatever. Next slide, please. All right, so there are 4 components that are defined. One for room metadata, which isn't really that hard to imagine, but it's just like a place to store the room name, the description, the picture for the room, the subject, the mood, if you support that, right? These are all things that have been around for ages and are popular on Discord and IRC and a few other community style messaging systems. The Mimi architecture document from the beginning called out this idea of having a participant list. And so I define a very simple format for a participant list. There is a list with a user and a single role. So that'll be discussion. That'll be part of our discussion after I sort of present what's there now. There's also a list of pre-authorized users, or rules for pre-authorized users. So the way to think about this is that instead of enumerating the name of a specific user in the participant list, that you have something that says, all right, if you've got this property that the company is acme.example and the organizational unit is marketing and the employee flag is true, then you can give access with the moderator role. I have another slide that goes into details about this. But it's about not having to enumerate everybody in a participant list, and that's especially important in enterprise settings. They already have complex identity systems that can convey lots of lots of attributes or claims, and we should be able to take advantage of that without having to like over complexify our role system. And then finally, the role definitions, which is a list of what each role can do. And then the last main section, it goes over individual capabilities, and each capability is something that that if the holder has it, then it authorizes them to do something. So next slide, please. Okay, so pre-authorized users. So first of all, when do we consult this? So in the model that I put in this draft here, this is consulted in two cases. So this is if I'm attempting to join. I'm neither in the participant list nor do I have a join code. So, well, why should I be allowed to join? Well, sorry, I'll go to that next. The other situation is if I'm already in the participant list, but I try to change my own role. So somebody added me, somebody who only had the power to add somebody as an ordinary user, but I have the privileges that would allow me to become an administrator or a moderator in my own right. And so I can use this change my own role capability in the role that I have, and then change my role to a role that was authorized in the pre-authorized users list. Okay, so how would I know? I gave a silly example earlier, but if I have a bunch of claims that are either in my credential or associated with my credential, then I can make an entry, a pre-auth entry, which is just a list of claims. So it might be, company name or domain name and department status, belongs to this group, whatever. And basically each one of these items in this claims list need to match the identity in the credential, or need to match the appropriate claim in the credential. And if all of them match, then that entry matches. And the client gets the first, and then for each entry, there's a role. So each, as the client walks through this list, basically the first one that matches, that's the role they get. So you would organize this in a way that if, for example, you wanted to make sure that you would efficiently ban people, you would stick the ban at the top, and then probably you would go with the most powerful roles, and then the next most powerful roles, and so on and so forth. Okay, any questions about this before I go on to the next slide? Hearing nothing, next slide, please. Okay. All right, so then what is in these role definitions? So this is which capabilities a holder of a role has, constraints on the minimum and maximum number of participants. So those don't necessarily have MLS clients, or active participants. So there are 4 constraints. So the active participants, you're not an active participant unless you have at least one client that's a member of the corresponding MLS group. So this will come into play later. So the classic reason to have these kind of constraints would be to say you need to have at least one admin in a group. You can't delete the last admin. You have to go and find somebody that can become the new admin, right? That's the kind of feature that this was intended for, and this is super common in enterprise settings, and it is useful in consumer and kind of community-based messaging systems as well. It's also going to be useful when we talk about policy enforcement as a as a sort of a safety measure to make sure that policy enforcers can't go and add themselves to a group, which I'll discuss in a couple of slides. Okay, and then the last of the three main things that's in a role definition is how the holder may change the role of other participants. I'm going to talk about that extensively in the next slide. And of course, each role needs to have sort of an identifier, which is the role index. It's an integer, a whole, positive, or yeah, it's a positive integer, a role name, and a role description. So the role index 0 is reserved for people who are not participants. So anyone who is not in the participant list is automatically 0 here, unless they got another role via the join code or a pre-authorized user entry. I also have a description of can ban and can unban capabilities, and those ensure that you're being they just assume that there is a role index of 1 with a name of banned. If you don't have one of those, you don't need to have that. But if you do, then that capability uses that particular role and assumes that particular role and uses it in a specific way. So it's kind of an optional feature. Okay, moving on to the next slide. I think we just skipped one. There we go. Okay. All right. So the most important attributes, or the most important capabilities that we have in this list is the these membership attributes. So these are attributes that allow you to modify the membership or modify the participants. So I have a list of the specific capabilities here, and there's some subtle differences between some that look pretty similar. So in terms of adding, there's adding a participant. There's adding which is basically the ability, if you're already a member, to add another user to the participant list. There's adding yourself, which is self-explanatory, but it adds yourself to the participant list. And there's adding your own client, which is allowing you to join if your username is in the participant list, but you don't have any clients, or you want to add an additional client. Now, the adds and removes, the logical question here is, well, if I add someone, I add them with what role? So if I'm an ordinary user, if I have the add participant capability, I obviously shouldn't be allowed to go and add someone with who becomes an administrator, because that would create a security problem. I could basically go and add a sock puppet as some high privileged user and then get them to elevate me to that same level. So this authorized role changes on the bottom line. This is basically a matrix that says, so you have one of these for each role. So if I'm at role 1, if I'm at, say, role 3, so I'm like a super admin, say, then I might have a list that looks like this, and it says basically I can take a user with role 0, which means that they're not a participant, and I can add them as role 1, which is banned, role 2, which is an ordinary user, or role 3, which is an admin. Likewise, I can take someone who is in role 1, which is banned, and I can remove them from the list completely. I can add them as an ordinary user, or I can add them as an admin, and so on and so forth. So for roles that have less power, or for example, for the banned role, this list is going to be substantially smaller. Does anybody have a question about how this would work? Okay, next slide, please. Now, one of the things that I have been struggling with for a while was how we make sure that we have policies that allow you to have, say, the hub is able to remove users who've been completely deleted from the system, or an anti-spam system, it can go and ban users who have abused policy, who've been reported. So, or it can move them to a role that doesn't allow them to send messages, but they can still see messages in the group. So this role system, it can do that. So by defining one or more additional roles, let's say we call one policy enforcer, and we can put an external sender in the participant lists with a particular role. So we can say, okay, we know this is the external sender. We have two external senders, and they both have the policy enforcer role, say role 5, or one of them has the policy enforcer policy enforcer alpha role, and the other has the policy deputy role, which has fewer privileges. Now, the cool thing here is that even though we've got the authentication via MLS, external senders, we also have the authorization using the same mechanism that we use for everything else. If we do this, this gives us the ability to give fine-grained capabilities. So, for example, the policy enforcer could delete clients, but not add them. So we can have some assurance that they can't insert themselves into a room. We can also use the constraints. So the maximum active participants constraint we can set to 0, so that there can never be an MLS member of the MLS, a member of the MLS group that's associated with that particular user, because they don't have the rights to become to be added as an MLS member. Okay. Any comments or questions on this one? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I just had a list of some of the other capabilities on the next the next couple of slides here. So we had some discussions in Mimi content about authorization of Mimi content. So these features here, these capabilities are entirely based on things that you can express in Mimi content. Now, you could use them theoretically for some other format, but they are tailored for things that you can do in Mimi content. So the simplest ones are sending and receiving messages, but we also have things related to replies, how you can react. So can react to message. So I might not be able to send a new message, but maybe I can still react to an existing message. Which would be something that you can do in Discord, for example, in communities and announcement communities. I can maybe I can delete my own reaction, but it takes an admin to be able to delete a reaction, somebody else's reaction. I can edit my own message. I can delete my own message, but it would take a powerful admin maybe to be able to delete somebody else's message. So these kind of follow all of those discussions that we've had. Okay. I will move on to the next slide unless anybody's got anything there. Now we haven't really gone down the path of much discussion about uploading files and audio and video and stuff like that, and being able to do real-time video yet. Real-time audio and video is a future charter item, but this mechanism can support those as well, with the sort of standard features that I have seen in a number of products. So being able to differentiate between sort of attachments, which are treated as a file and not sort of automatically rendered or previewed necessarily, and images, videos, and audio. Okay, next slide, please. Finally, I have a list of very disruptive changes. These are things that you would probably give to only an owner or super admin. Being able to completely change the room membership style. That's something which needs to be harmonized between this and the room policy document. But changing role definitions, changing the pre-authorized user list, changing other policy attributes that are in the room policy, like, for example, a recording policy or a bot policy, or operational, MLS operational requirements policies. Finally, we've got being able to reinitialize the MLS group that's inside of a room and destroying the room completely. So this is the kind of like the moral equivalent to the GitHub dangerous section that you have to enter your password before you can do. Okay, so that's it for the slides. I think we go to the next slide. I think it just says room policy. Yeah, so that's it for the slides that I prepared for app components. Does anybody want to ask any questions or say anything about what they like or dislike about this approach? Timo, you have the floor.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so if you go to slide 5, I think you talked about active participants and set a limit on active participants. Does this mean that users may be unable to delete the app or something when there's an active participant limit? Because I don't know how that would be enforced. For example, you have an active limit on the owner. You want to have one owner in the room, and the owner wants to delete the app and doesn't care about anything at all. How would you handle this?
So in terms of let's take participants first and then active participants second. So leaving the group in a situation where there is no administrator available, like you simply would not be allowed. Like this is a common existing feature where you're just not allowed to delete the user who is the last admin in the group. Now, okay, yeah. So that admin was like, arrested this morning and taken off to jail for defrauding the entire business. Like, yeah, you probably don't want them to have access to your room, but you do need to come up. But it sort of puts the room in a state that is nonsensical, and so your remedies are to not express a minimum constraint. It is to always allow, some kind of a super admin the ability to add a new, to promote someone to an administrator, to a group admin permission. It is to just destroy a room when the last admin is removed, right? So there are no great choices, but these are very kind of human choices, and they mirror the kinds of real world choices you make that have to do with other security things that people do, right? So if you give three people the YubiKeys, which you need two of them in order to get to recover the private key of your HSM, and all three of them are fired, well, you just hosed yourself, right?
Yeah, but what happens to the room? I'm also worried about you could just set a minimum active user limit on normal participants, like set it to 200 when there's 200 people in the room, and then no one is able to leave the room. What would happen if someone tried? So Mimi,
You could do that, but I mean, I don't think so. I think our job is to provide people with tools and to tell them what they shouldn't, what the consequences are if they use them. We have a clear set of requirements that people want to be able to enforce some of these constraints, and I've seen people who have had constraints that you need to have at least 2 or 3 of a particular type of user. And so the common use here is if I have certain types of conferences that you need to have at least 3 active participants. Otherwise, they're going to automatically harvest the group and destroy it.
Okay.
So this is common also in like certain free scenarios, right? So
it would be great to write down, to explicitly say what happens when something is violated and there's no way to recover the room. So, for example, if the minimum user limit is violated, destroy the room. Just write down what happens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about on this, or should we go to do you want to go directly to the mailing list discussion we had?
Maybe one more thing about external senders. I don't know what slide that was. It sounded a bit weird to give them a role in the room, which is like a magic role, but it is encoded. Wait, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, my video froze. I don't know. It seems weird to give them a role when it's just a magic special case. Maybe we should handle it as a special case and not have it in the normal role system.
Why do you think it's magic?
It seems like you want to enforce that there's only one member, or no client of that role, and it seems like you want to handle it as a special case.
I could create a human user, give a human user the same types of privileges that I gave in my example for the policy enforcer, that I wouldn't want that user to be able to become an active participant.
It's interesting because you want to handle it as a special case in Mimi, and I don't know if maybe that should be a special case in the room policy as well, but it's okay like this, I guess. I don't have strong feelings about it.
Yeah, I mean, all of this work has been very strongly driven by the requirements that I've seen, and being able to address those requirements. So I think one of the criticisms is that if you have any kind of flexible, role / attribute system, that it introduces complexity. So kind of like segging into the discussion that we had on the mailing list, the main reason for that was that we have providers that, lots of providers that have sort of fixed role definitions, but those role definitions aren't identical. So if we want somebody, in some, the ordinary user is allowed to allowed to add another user, and others they're not. Or in some, the the admin is allowed to do certain things and isn't in another.
Okay. Yeah, this goes into the discussion we had, and my feelings are maybe we could have enough hard-coded roles to cover all these use cases, just not in the same role, but have like 3 different kinds of regular users, and depending on the room type, we use one of those 3 hard-coded users. But we can go into that later if you want.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, and one last thing, maybe. Did you still consider knocking on a room? I don't know if we decided we dismissed this feature or.
Yeah. So initially I had knocks in role-based access control, and to be able to knock was something that you could do as a as a user, role 0, right, a non-participant.
Yeah.
And you could potentially do it as a banned user.
I guess, yeah.
Right. So that would be configurable. The problem is that since we didn't actually define what a knock is, I just stuck it in the editor's copy of app components. I stuck it in the sort of reserved for future use capabilities names.
Okay, I see.
Can knock and can accept knock, and there were a few others like that. I've got like can create join code, which is that in theory that's something that should be between a client and between a client and the hub, and whether that's something that you can do in an interoperable way. We haven't really discussed how you would do that. I have some ideas, but so I just put that as reserved as well.
Okay.
Subgroups, sending direct messages, sending targeted messages, and then like present style stuff like changing your name, changing your own name, changing your avatar. Those are things that we haven't really covered in the working group yet. So I just stuck them in this reserved capability section.
Okay. I noticed one more thing in the list we have open right now. Maybe you could rename some features like what was it? Can add self to just can join, or something more clear. I think can add participant could just be can invite. Use. I think that would be more clear to see what that does.
Yeah, I think we can bike shed infinitely on the names,
Okay.
but
Fair enough.
we can I had various reasons for using these because in some cases this went through 2 or even 3 or 4 iterations, just to make it like super obvious which one it was. I don't think I quite accomplished it, but I'm open to clear alternatives. So.
Okay, sure.
All right, Tim, do you want to go ahead and clear these slides?
Well, first, I wanted to relay a question from Eric Berger, who had to drop, that he put in the chat, which is, all right, I'll just read what they wrote. My consternation is that there are a lot of permissions here. That in itself is complex. What happens a year from now, Mimi is deployed and someone comes up with another permission? How will we handle extensibility? How will clients and hubs deterministically deal with new permissions?
Yeah, so I have sort of 3 parts to an answer to that. The first one is that we have a set of things that are related to membership, and that list has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 permissions. And I think that every client that does Mimi should have to deal with those, because in order to authorize adds and removes and changes to the participant list, they would need to know how to do that. Then we have the, adjust metadata and the message capabilities. And So I would say that we could do this in blocks. So like all the message capabilities, you could say, hey, like the ability to authorize these message capabilities, they sort of depend on your ability to do the features within. So if a particular client never sets the topic ID, then it doesn't really make sense for it to check its own authorization about whether it can start a topic or reply in a topic or edit a topic, because it doesn't do anything, doesn't have anything to do with topics. But to the extent that it can authorize actions that are taken by other members, I think that sort of being able to do some cohesive chunk block, yeah, great example, Timo. Being able to share location, right? So having chunks of these of functionality, we could stick these in a component that is a list of supported capability packages and a list of required capability packages. So we would be using the same extensibility mechanism that's already defined in AppSync and has already mostly moved into MLS extensions in the editor's copy.
So if I understand right, out of the gate, Mimi would define some set of permissions or capabilities, rather. And then some of them would be defined as like essential, all implementations must know what these mean. Some others might be set as optional. And then additionally, any given room would advertise, here's a set of capabilities that any client or, well, client certainly must be able to make sense of to participate in this room. And if you don't recognize one of these capabilities, then like, I don't know, bubble up some error to the user saying,
you can't join this room because you don't know how to do.
Yeah. Go update your client and maybe you'll learn about the capabilities. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Thanks.
Okay. And whoever's doing notes, it may be worth making a 2-liner about that for Eric. He joins again. All right. If you wanna take those slides off the screen, I guess, Tim, we can. Do you have the ability to? Can you share the mailing list messages in this thread that?
Yes, I can. Give me a moment to pull up the list archive. Although, is the thread here proposal for room policy started by Timo?
I think that's the most salient one. Yeah.
All right.
All right. And I don't need to drive this. If you want to drive it, Tim, up to you.
I'd say you should go ahead. You're probably more up to speed on this discussion than I am.
Okay. So if we go down to the, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the 8th message in this thread is Timo saying, asking about the motivation. And then the next message, I sort of gave my motivation for what I did. And then I think we should go back and look at Timo's alternative approach, which I think is in like message 1 and 4, maybe. I'll get the exact ones, but yeah, I think it's the last one there. The last one on that list of threads.
Sorry, you mean?
Okay, so you had a list of threads. Yeah, go to the bottom one, the very bottom one.
Yours or Timo's message?
Timo says, I've read your editor's copy draft. Could we talk more about the motivation? Yeah, sure. Timo's. Okay. It is flexible because everything can be customized, but it is difficult to add more roles due to the interaction with all the other roles. You probably cannot design a UI for all the role interactions. So yeah, so Timo, it sounds like you're interested in being able to, I mean, the thing that you've mentioned this in a couple of messages before is that you want to be able to support Discord style scenarios where administrators can set permissions in a very fine-grained way and kind of define their own, roll their own behavior inside of a.
So
inside of a
as I understood it, the main motivation for custom roles was to have a lot of flexibility to specify custom roles for one room or one set of rooms and really tailor it to the community that is there. And I gave some examples. For example, in some rooms you want a programmer role who has specific permissions to write in some threads, or an artist role, or many different kinds of roles. And some Discord servers, bigger ones, make really heavy use of these custom roles.
Okay, so sorry, I'm just getting my chair out of the way. Yeah, so I gave then a reply, but I can paraphrase it, which is, I think we do want to be able to support the Discord use case, but perhaps more importantly, we want to make sure that when we have multiple providers that have different fixed roles that have different permissions, that clients can go and implement one thing that makes sure that they can authorize correctly the authorization policy of a hub that's not their provider. So I think that while what I proposed is certainly complex, there's some things that I did to try to simplify it by having a single role per user, by having bans and external senders use the role definitions for authorization. And so I think it's it's also you can reason easily about how long it takes an individual client to go through and do authorization based on the size of a role list and the size of a pre-authorization list.
You're talking about computational effort?
Yeah, the computational effort of each client to be able to authorize some activity. I think that it's it's pretty easy to estimate what that would be. And if you have limits on the number of the number of roles and the number of pre-authorization items on a particular hub, then I think it's trivial to go and figure out like what the worst case authorization evaluation time is on a given client. So if we've got multiple roles per user, I have some concerns about a couple of things. So one is that we would need, in order to do bans, that we would
Okay,
need
maybe
negative
just to clarify
capabilities.
for the room, in my approach, I specified multiple roles per user.
Yeah.
So, for example, a regular user could have the flag regular and moderator, and they stack on top of each other and add more and more permissions.
Right. So do you want to take the floor for a minute, Timo, and kind of lay out how when I like, let's say that I have Alice goes to adds Bob, how Bob gets Bob's initial list of roles, what capabilities go in each role, and then we can just walk through that a little bit and just see some of the differences.
Okay, yeah. So if Alice wants to invite Bob, she must have the capability to invite someone. So the system must go through the list of roles that Alice has and looks if in this list is the capability to invite someone. Maybe you can open the very first email I sent, which has another summary of what I'm saying.
And so this would be like, you could implement this as, say, like, here is a set for this particular role, here's a set for this role, here's a set for this role, and then you take the union of those three sets as your capabilities for that user.
Exactly, yeah. And if this set contains the invite capability, then the invite goes through and adds a list of default roles to the new user Bob. And the list of default roles, I guess you could specify it in the room policy as well, or you add as many roles as Alice wants to add to Bob. For example, Alice could have a list of roles she could add, similar to your approach. In your approach, you had the transitions, and Alice could also choose what roles she wants to give Bob, and the same option could be applied here. Alice could have invite Bob as an admin, as a moderator, or as an admin and participant of the programmer group. So you could specify multiple roles as well. Yeah, this is it's not more to it, I think.
Okay. So basically, you'd have a similar list to what I've got right now. For Alice's role, then Bob would, she could assign Bob any of those roles that she has in her authorization list.
Yeah.
You mentioned, so then that the two things, you mentioned briefly how you would do bans. And then the other thing would be how if Alice was only allowed to add Bob as an ordinary user, but Bob actually had some ability to, if Bob had joined himself, he would have had the ability to become an admin or a moderator. So those are two scenarios there.
So I think it's pretty similar to your approach, where any user has the capability to add roles to themselves, or can have the ability to add roles to themselves. For example, if they have the pre-authorization secrets or special tokens, they could just add more roles to themselves. For example, if Bob has the right organization in his user definition, he could make himself an admin in the room and just add more roles to himself. And what was the other thing?
Banning.
Banning. Yeah, banning is not part of the role system. You could implement kicking. Maybe I start with that. When you kick a user, you remove all of their roles, and you must have the permission to remove all the roles of a user. So a moderator could kick regular users because he has enough permissions, but a moderator could not kick an admin because a moderator does not have the capability to remove roles from someone higher than him.
Okay,
and
so you would have a specific hierarchy of roles, or
yes,
you would just explicitly say that this role can remove people with these roles.
There's a special hierarchy, which is the set of predefined roles. I think I defined 4 or 5 predefined roles, and these are special because they have a strict hierarchy. One is better than the other. Admin is on top of moderator, is on top of regular user, is on top of visitor, is on top of someone outside of the room. So there's a set of roles with this strict hierarchy, and there are more custom roles on top of that, which sort of builds a tree. You can imagine it from top to bottom. You gain more privileges, and you could also branch off and give yourself more roles, like the programmer role, the artist role, and special roles like this. But every user has one of the roles in the hierarchy.
You mean one of the predefined roles, or just they appear somewhere? Okay.
Yeah, each user has roles of this hierarchy, so in every room the client understands what permissions, or understands the set of permissions and where the user stands. So the moderator role is the same in every room. It's always called moderator, and the moderator role always has more permissions than the regular user. This is the same in every room, and it's the same role ID as well.
Okay.
So what specific capabilities the moderator has is up to the room, but it's always more capabilities than a regular user.
Okay. So I have two more questions, but if somebody else wants to jump in and probe around a little bit.
Let me come back to banning a user. Banning is not a role. So you could imagine adding a role to be banned, but in my system, you could have multiple roles, and it doesn't make sense to have a role banned and a role moderator, so I don't do it like this. Instead, banning users is something separate from the role system. There's a list of banned users, and if a user is in this ban list, they are not allowed to have a role at all. And this is always enforced. When you change the policy or change the roles of a user, there's always a check to make sure that banned users don't have a role.
Okay. Okay, so let's say that I have a multi-enterprise, like I have a room that was set up by Alice, and she set this up because she wants to have conversations with some people from her company and 2 other companies, and she doesn't. So she grants a sort of a company B admin permission to Bob. So Bob can add and remove people from Bob's organization, but can't add people from other organizations. And likewise for Kathy. So Kathy can do that for her company. Meanwhile, Alice retains the right to be able to remove users inside of all the organizations, including her own.
Okay, I think that's not possible to model with my system, because the users must fit in one hierarchy, one linear hierarchy, and you're talking about splitting it up into 2 organizations.
Yeah.
And admins in that organization should always only be able to kick users inside that organization. So this type of branching is not supported in what I have.
Okay. So I think we've got a question about whether we want to be able to support those kind of requirements or not. And then, yeah, so I guess going back to kicking and banning. So if you kick somebody, how would they be able to rejoin after they've been kicked if they're not in the participant list anymore, if they don't have a role anymore?
It's the same as joining works for any user. Kicking is as if they were never in the room. So
okay. So that's not really consistent with the definition of kick from most of the that we've been using in the working group.
Okay, I know kicking like this, but what are you thinking about?
So in the kick, the user can immediately go and join again, but and they join back with the previous, so that basically they remain in the participant list with their old role. It's just their clients that have been removed. But if somebody added themselves via join code, and then the cat goes and sits on the keyboard and is like sending hundreds of messages that are obviously not, it's not really spam. The moderator kicks them, or the microphone is on and they're in an audio conference. They get kicked. They come back. They sort out the problem. Put the cat in the other room, fix the broken key. Get a new keyboard, whatever, and then they rejoin.
So what you're thinking about is just removing all the clients of a user, but not removing the participant from the room.
Yeah.
Okay.
I suppose you could do that in
yeah,
I don't
I guess
see
this would be a different capability. Yeah, it would be a different capability. Like the kick I had would just remove the participant from the list completely, but you could have another one to remove all clients, but allow them to rejoin.
Okay. Tim, do you remember, or Alyssa, if you're online, do you have a recollection about what this looked like in the matrix of other products that we looked at?
Let me dig that up real quick.
So yeah, I think a summary of the current discussion is that the system you designed would have a completely customizable set of roles, which allow all sorts of setups, anything, but it's more difficult to design or to configure this room. And I would say it's easier to make mistakes. For example, if you add a new role, you must make sure that this new role can be kicked by other users, can invite more users, and so on.
Yeah, for sure. You would want to, if you were offering the ability to do this directly to an admin or something, you would want to have some kind of a linter for sure.
Yeah.
But okay.
And also, you could end up with confusing scenarios where you have a super admin, but the super admin, they forgot to enable the permission to send messages or delete this kind of user. And so the name super admin does not mean the same thing in every room.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so looking at the spreadsheet that Alyssa
let me
pointed to, it doesn't explicitly say which style of kick is the most common here. So I think either way, I'll put an issue on room policy that we need to define what kick actually does.
Yeah, I think both versions are good to have, like removing a participant and temporarily removing all devices.
Okay, adding new issue. 2 versions of kick. Okay, and then the other, so one of the features that has been described, it was described in like way back in like Jabber multi-user chat, and that is quite useful in the kind of big environments, and Discord does a nice job of this, is Jabber describes as granting and revoking voice. So basically, granting the permission to send message to, say, okay, you're not allowed to send, and you're allowed to send. And in environments where you sort of raise hand, then you can be transferred temporarily from one role to another. I'm guessing you can still model that as you have a role for speaking, for having voice, and then you would have other roles, and that would prevent you from having to have like a proliferation of roles there. So that might be an advantage to your approach.
So you're talking about having a normal hierarchy, but no one can speak in the default levels, but having one custom role which allows users to speak. Which can be added or removed
in
from
the
anyone.
sort of, in the sort of lower powered roles, the roles below, moderator or presenter or whatever, and then you would have a separate role for having a voice.
Rowan, do you have a link to the issue you just wrote up about the kick question, just so I can stick it in the notes?
It's half typed. I'll give it to you in a sec here. I'll paste it into the
the chat. Yeah, okay. Or it's fine if you want to clean it up later. I can just, anyways, please continue.
Okay. 3. Room policy 3. Here. Okay. And then I'll also create an issue for this. Do we want this? Okay, I'm going to write up this next one, which I'm assuming would be 4, which is about okay. So I think we have a couple of different angles that we can look at this from, and as usual, is often comes down to like what do we really want in terms of requirements.
Maybe one thing which we haven't really talked about yet, the main motivation for Discord's custom roles is that you have in one Discord community, you have many different channels, they call it, many different subrooms. And in each subroom, you can modify the room policy slightly. For example, to say, in this set of subrooms, these users are allowed to talk. Users with this role are allowed to talk. And in this other set of subrooms, these other users are allowed to talk. So this differentiates it from a strict hierarchy, because you can set different subrooms with slight modifications of the room policy. And I don't know if we want to support it like this in Mimi.
Yeah.
But I think this is one of the main considerations.
I think it's really good. So, you've come up with some concrete things like like you mentioned she, her, and like a gender label, right? Now, personally, I don't see that one has any sort of likely has authorization in authorization consequences, but I could think of sort of a similar thing, which is maybe there's an LGBT community, and there is a place where people, sort of curious people ask questions. But then there are other groups where it's like, this is, gay teens in Uganda, where that's illegal. And so you need to have the safe role in order to be able to see the identity of you need to be able, in order to be able to see messages, you need to have in that subgroup, you need to have the safe role, or maybe you need to have, the out role, or I mean, I could think of a few scenarios, but I think one of the things that would be really useful for us to do is to capture some of these scenarios. And I would say to anyone, maybe I'll reach out to Eric as well. If you've got some particular scenarios that you're concerned about they're getting dropped, maybe we just go create an issue, even if it's consider, the first sentence of the first word is consider, such and such scenario, and then we can have a description of the scenario in the issue.
I think you made a really good point with the safe role, because how would this map to MLS rooms? Because normally in one room you can read all the messages in a room because they all share the same secrets. So have you thought about if one room policy maps to multiple MLS rooms? Or if one room policy can be applied to many rooms, or things like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as each MLS group has, the cardinality that I assume is that you have one room, and at any given time it has a single MLS group, or possibly two if you're doing a reinit. So I could do a reinit and say everybody needs to go and transition to this new version of the group, which has new either like some policy which is dramatically changed, or like a new cipher suite, or new MLS version, or new credential requirements, or something like that. And so this means that people who are people who are offline, they go offline, they come back, they go, oh yeah, I need to go and upgrade my client, or I need to go and renit, and they do that, and then they join the new MLS group. But in fairly short order, that old one disappears. But that the room itself and the group context in both of those has a pretty consistent set of rooms, and that if you create subgroups, that those are expressed by different rooms, but you can use the sort of parent, there's a in room policy, there is a parent dependent room type.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can say that all of the subrooms are parent dependent on the main community group. So you have to be in the main, you have to have to be a participant. You don't need to be an active participant, but you need to be a participant in the community room in order to be a participant in the individual subrooms. And then each one of those, it can have a separate definition of the rooms. And of course you would derive, like, unless you had reason to have those be different, you would copy those from a sort of a consistent place, right? You wouldn't want to individually define every one of those, but you could theoretically, if your software permitted it, you could customize the individual, individual room policies in the subrooms.
Yeah. Okay. This sounds similar to how Matrix does it as well, with the parent-dependent room. But in Matrix, rooms are not actually linked at all. So you need to have permission once to join the children rooms, but the permission cannot be checked again to make sure later that you're still in the parent room.
In the parent room.
Yeah. What was I going to say? I assume the rooms and the subrooms all have to be on the same hub, because only the hub can really see all the participants. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's also an assumption we should write down somewhere.
Yeah.
When we talk about subrooms.
Okay. Easy peasy. I can add that to room policy. Okay, so I think your banning description about how banning would work in your environment is a separate thing. I'm a little concerned about, and I don't feel like I fully understand it. So if you feel like
What's
you
your
can
concern?
explain it so that the people who are the handful of us who are on the call can understand in some fixed period of time, I would say go for it. But if not, if you want to just say, I'm going to send in the next week, I'm going to send a snippet of something of sort of draft quality that describes it.
Yeah. I actually did write up a more formal version of my comments I made on the mailing list, but I wanted to discuss everything here first. But to keep it short, banning is not, to be banned is not a role in the room, but it's an extra list. So in the room state, there's one mapping from user to roles, and there's a separate item which says lists all the bans in the room. And every time a user wants to make an action, usually you would check if they have the capabilities to do this action. But before all this happens, there's a check, is this user banned? And if the user is banned, not even the capabilities are checked. We don't even look at the roles of users. If the user is banned, we abort immediately and stop the action. And also when a user wants to invite someone, and they would theoretically have the permission to invite someone to the room, there's another check. If a user is banned, they cannot have roles inside this room. So this would also fail. The action would fail, and you would abort and tell the users.
Okay.
Does this
You would
make
still
sense?
have, yeah. You would still have permission. Like you would have to have an explicit permission to say, add this person to the ban list.
Yeah, this would be an extra capability, add to ban list. Yes.
Okay. And then presumably we would remove clients from the ban, we would remove all the clients from the MLS group. We could leave them
you
in
remove all the roles and all the clients from the user and add them to the ban list.
Okay, so in other words, in order to unban, you need to explicitly reestablish their roles.
To unban, you have to remove them from the ban list. And now it's like they're not in the room. And now they have the ability to rejoin or be invited again.
Okay.
And I wrote down in one email, another motivation for this is to have timed bans. For example, you want to ban someone because they annoyed you, but only for a week or someone to give them some time to rethink their actions. And this, I try to model this in a role setting, but having timed roles and expiring roles is really difficult. So this was another reason to have a separate ban list. And so in this ban list, there's not only a list of users, but also like an until timestamp. And when this timestamp expires, they are treated as being unbanned.
Okay.
And I also wrote down, when you ban someone, you want to remember who banned them and the reason for the ban. And I wrote this down in an email as well.
Like I saw those parts those parts I understood there.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I think I mean, some providers may choose to not bother to fill those in, or if they may even, like, for privacy reasons, they might omit the who or the reason, or even the reason, but that all seems reasonable. The other thing that I was thinking of was suspension. That with the role system that I described, you could create a suspended role. You could create rules about how to do a suspension, and the suspension would it could allow you to, for example, to
what do you mean with suspension? Is this a timeout as well, to temporarily ban someone?
I mean, the way I think of it is that, like, suspensions are something where it's like maybe you're subject to an appeal. So there could be an automatic time-based system that just says, okay, well, if there's no more bad behavior, you automatically unsuspended. Or it could be that the user takes some manual approach to appeal and say, you know, hey, like, please unsuspend me. This was, you know, this wasn't me. This was, you know, my password was borrowed, and, you know, somebody hacked my password and used my account, and now I reset my password. It's all good now. And so that would allow for, you know, maybe a less severe set. Maybe you're still in the group. You can still see messages, but you can't send. You can't like. You can't add new participants. You can still remove yourself, right? So you could imagine something like this, right? I'm not sure that. I think you could still accomplish this with the system that you proposed. It would just be a lower powered role in the linear list.
This is also what I considered for this announcement type room, where new users are not regular users, but restricted users, and only have abilities to read messages and send reactions.
Okay. All right. Well, I see a couple more people who are theoretically in this chat. Did anyone else like to say anything at all about authorization policy, room policy, roles, etc.? Okay, well. Hi, Raphael.
Hey, I thought it would be awkward if nobody said anything. So I'm just here to say something. So I'm wondering who else is going to implement that. So we're going to implement some of that, but it would be interesting to have some interrupt on that at some point, because this is all theoretical right now. And when you implement it, you discover that some stuff might just not work the way you expected it to. So I don't know. I don't actually expect an answer here in this room right now, but I'm just saying we're just at the theoretical spec level right now, and ultimately we should get further than that.
Okay. Hey, Rick.
Hey, Rohan. How are things going?
Doing okay. It's been a long time.
All right. Yeah, we're back. And apologies for having to drop out in the middle and shoot me in the head if this was already discussed. I am kind of bought into the long list of permissions. It gives me concern, but this is where building stuff might suss it out, like the 3 different ways of saying I can add myself. Are there really 3? Because you did explain the nuances between them, but do we really need 3 distinct things? Because with that proliferation comes TMOs. I point to, well, can't we consolidate a bunch of these? And I'm an admin, I'm a participant, I'm a programmer, and my concern is learning from the SIP experience. If we start creating roles like admin, then people are just going to code admins, and we're going to potentially face interoperability challenges when people like Raphael and Harditya build an implementation, and they're literally the only ones on the planet that do all the nuanced permissions. So that's my discomfort. As I just said, and you probably saw on the list, Harditya is actually trying to build some of this, so we probably will get some real world input. But I'm just really concerned that we're doing an awful lot of work And is it something that's actually going to get used?
Yeah. So just to repeat one thing that I said, well, I think you may have been gone, that when we have lots of providers that offer, 2 to 4 fixed roles, and then, but what those roles do is different between those. And so we definitely want to be able to have clients from other providers be able to authorize correctly things that were, in a fixed role definition over there. And like either of the proposals would allow that. We have a couple of requirements questions, I think, that that help suss this out. And then we also have the Discord scenario, where we have at least an existence proof of one popular provider in the wild. They're not doing end-to-end encryption for text messages, but one that does have pretty complicated rules. So if somebody wanted to build a Discord-like system, then they're going to have, I wouldn't say arbitrarily complex, but certainly meaningfully complex customizable attributes or roles.
Right.
Maybe one note, Discord doesn't have the notion of individual clients for a user. And this is something, maybe we don't need this, maybe we do need this. What are your thoughts on this? Like, do we need to allow a user to add more clients, or is that just assumed that when you have one client in the room, you can add more?
So a common feature maybe not terribly common, a somewhat common feature in enterprise messaging is to be able to invite a guest, but the guest can't go and the guest is is basically limited to a single client.
Where does this come from? And what's the motivation for this?
The motivation is that you have that it's kind of like join links, where you want to be able to say, hey, like, come and we want to be able to ask you a question in the context of this room that we created, but we don't want this to be able to get if there's a compromise, we don't want it to be easy to like somebody would have to take over that client. They can't just go and add a new client, and you can't have a proliferation of clients associated there. And part of that is also like, you do that, you join, you're not going to automatically join on all your devices. So you don't go join on your tablet and your, and like all over the place. Like you very much are restricting this to a single active device at a time. Now that may be I think it's very satisfying for certain privacy sensitive folks, but it's not as necessarily mainstream of a feature. Raphael?
Yeah, I just wanted to add what we discussed at the MLS interim the other day with the concept of virtual clients, just so that this group is also aware of that. So what's being explored there is the idea to only have one client per user in a group. And that client is a virtual client, meaning it sort of masks any real clients a user might have. And so it solves a number of problems, namely the problem we're just discussing, where groups and delivery services don't have to be aware of the concept of multi-client anymore. So it's still early days, but the idea is to keep iterating on that and then also propose it for Mimi and see what folks are going to say about it. So if it came to that, then that would no longer be an issue, essentially.
Yeah. I agree that it could be very, very desirable. And I just caution that I think that some customers are going to want to make sure that they have direct exposure to all the clients, or at least, like policy control over individual clients.
Right.
Okay. That's all I got. Timo, you have anything else?
Yeah, I'm thinking about how we could combine the ideas we had today, and I'm thinking about your problem of having two organizations in the same room, having each one manage itself, and maybe this would not be like a linear set of permissions, but sort of a tree which branches out, or maybe a directed graph which can merge together again. Maybe these are some ideas thinking about.
Yes.
Where roles build on top of each other and add more capabilities. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it comes down to the evaluation complexity. And I think if you wanted, so one thing to consider might be that your UI might let you define everything the way that you described, where each user has multiple roles, and then and you can have a tree of a hierarchy that's a tree, and then that gets basically compiled into a flat role space.
I see.
So that would be a way that you could make a UI that's less complex.
Then
then
another client comes along and makes some change which does not compile back to a tree, and then there's a lot of confusion. So it needs,
so I think that the issue is that there's what the individual clients need to do for authorization, which is they need to follow the authorization rules that they know, based on whichever model they're using.
Okay.
And then there is the defining new roles, and the defining new roles is going to be closely coupled to a specific provider, what roles it offers. And so like that doesn't even necessarily need to be the client doing it in their own UI. It could be a web interface that they're using to do that. Or it could be maybe the only native interface is with same provider clients. Like standardizing how you go and do arbitrarily complex role definitions, that doesn't need to be within the scope of Mimi. And so taking a sort of like a multi-role, multi-attribute view and compiling that into individual roles, that could be something that could be done on an individual provider.
Yeah, interesting. I'm not sure. Yeah, I guess we need to think more about these ideas.
Yep.
Because usually I think everything could be represented in sort of a tree, or maybe even a linear set of like permissions. And yeah, I think it would be simpler to have it easier to understand if you have a simpler model like this for the users and clients. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think a tree is not necessarily going to be simple to understand for a user.
So
some
what I
users.
mean is, it's you can always say this person is more powerful than this person, at least in a linear set of rooms where you have the owner, the admin, the moderator, and there you have a strict. So when I ask you, do you want to become a moderator? you see, it's better than I'm currently am, so of course I want to have more permissions. But if it's just a set of permissions for each role, and each role is different, you cannot directly say this maybe.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, the gender tags, where would those appear in the list?
Okay. This would not be part of the hierarchy. This would be add-ons to this hierarchy. So in my original proposal, I wrote there's a fixed hierarchy of 5 or 6 roles, and there are add-on roles, custom roles floating around and can be added on top of users in this hierarchy. So every user is part of this hierarchy, but there can be more roles for specific extra features. Does that make sense?
Okay. But the extra roles wouldn't have would or would not have authorization.
I think they could.
Okay.
Because this is the example with giving voice to someone. You could do this with an add-on role if you want. A custom role.
So maybe it sounds like maybe what you're getting at is that what you really have is you have a tree where a set of predefined roles are always a list, but that underneath any given role, under any given defined role, that you could have branches that are custom defined.
I think not like this, because an admin can have the same custom role as a normal user. So these custom roles are not specific to one point in the hierarchy, but to any part of the tree. Okay.
So when you would decide, so you might have authorization decisions So this worries me as an attack vector. So if you have a tree, I know how to traverse the tree and to make sure that I do, give deference to whoever is higher in the tree, or is a higher privilege level. If it's a separate tree or a separate line or multiple separate lines, if I have basically a forest of these things, I don't know whether.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we should differentiate between capabilities, because not all capabilities are dangerous. Some capabilities just mean you send messages and have no authorization impact. But for example, kicking someone is a more important action. And this should be only possible to the specific roles in the hierarchy. So you asked before if these custom floating around roles should have authorization permission. What exactly did you mean with this? Because is sending messages authorization? So
I would say certainly adding and removing users, adding and removing clients would
I agree.
qualify. And I think that sending messages and receiving messages is also relevant there.
Okay, because I would draw the line between permissions that allow you to modify other users and remove their permissions or kick them or add new users, which for me are more important authorization decisions instead of sending messages, which do not affect other users.
The problem that I have with these kind of floating permissions is if I have somebody who has a role, someone who's moderator or speaker, and they have permission to send messages, and have quite a number of other permissions, but then they have the they're not in they don't have the out role, and in a subgroup you're only allowed to send if you have the out role. Then I don't know how to model which takes precedence. across these different lines, right?
Okay, maybe I should repeat again. My main idea for having these floating rules was to model subrooms. And if we say we have different policies in subrooms, maybe we could model this differently as well and don't need authorization permissions on these roles. So I think we should think more about how to handle subrooms and sub-policies. The problem is, how do we allow a specific set of users some set of permissions in a subroom? For example, only programmers talk in the programmer's thread or subroom. And it doesn't matter if the programmer is an admin or moderator, because in this room, there's a special case for programmers.
Yeah, so we need to figure out how an attacker would try to exploit this to gain extra privileges and make sure that we have a good answer as to why that's not possible.
Okay.
All right. I guess coming up with some scenarios we can both do, and then describing how you would do some of these for your view solution. I guess that's in your court there, and
Okay.
Good discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nice to make. I hope we can make some progress and come up with a good solution.
Cool.
Well, it's a very pleasant diplomatic IETF note to close the meeting on. We still have 18 minutes on the clock, so it doesn't sound like anybody has anything else they'd like to bring up, but of course, anyone's welcome to. The only thing that I would add is keep an eye out on the mailing list, well, as usual for anything, but in particular, the chairs are going to do another adoption call for the discovery requirements document, imminently. Hopefully we'll dispatch some email about that later today. So please keep an eye out for that, and we welcome all responses to that adoption call. Otherwise, I believe we're done for today until our next interim, which should be 2 weeks from today. So with that, I think we'll adjourn. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Rowan.